I want to start by asking you a question. Imagine a man who needs to cross a river to see his fiancée. He asks a woman if he can borrow her boat, and she says, "I've fallen for you, but you don't love me back. That's not fair, so no." He moves on and asks another woman, who tells him, "I'll let you borrow it on one condition. I really like you, and while I don't care if you feel the same way, you have to stay and spend the night with me. Otherwise, no boat." He's backed into a corner, so he agrees. After crossing the river and meeting his fiancée, he decides to be completely honest and confesses what happened. His fiancée is devastated and breaks up with him on the spot. Later on, he meets another woman, and when he tells her the whole story, she simply says, "I don't mind. That has nothing to do with me." Now, based purely on your gut instinct, rank these 5 people in order of how much you like them. Don't overthink it. Just go with your very first reaction. You might assume this is just a typical personality quiz designed to test your views on relationships and fidelity, but it's not. If we write down these 5 people using single-letter codes, every letter actually carries a hidden meaning you'd never expect. M stands for money, L stands for love, S stands for sex, F stands for family, and E stands for enterprise or career. The way you ranked them reveals what you truly prioritize in your subconscious. Welcome to today's episode. I'm your host. Today, we are diving into a concept that feels incredibly familiar yet entirely alien: the subconscious. You might think you know yourself inside out, but the truth is, you may have never actually met the person hiding deep within your own mind. There is a psychological test that has circulated widely for years, using surface-level choices to peer into a person's subconscious dynamics. When you look at the puzzle, try not to get tripped up by the letters used for the characters. Each one has a very specific hidden meaning. In the story, a man named M wants to cross a river to marry his fiancée, F. Since they are separated by water, M has to find a boat, so he starts searching. He encounters a woman named L, who happens to own a boat. When M asks to borrow it, L suddenly falls for him and asks, "I love you, do you love me?" Being an honest guy, M replies, "I'm sorry, I have a fiancé, I can't love you." Because of this, L flatly refuses to help him, arguing, "I love you, but you don't love me. That's not fair, so I'm not lending you my boat." Dejected, M keeps searching and crosses paths with a woman named S. He asks for her boat, and S tells him, "I can absolutely lend it to you, but on one condition: I really like you. It doesn't matter if you like me back, but you have to stay and spend the night with me. If you don't, no boat." M is stuck in a terrible dilemma. L already turned him down, and if S refuses him too, he won't be able to cross the river to see F, and rumor has it, these are the only 2 boats around. For the sake of the fiancé waiting on the other side, he feels he has no choice but to give in to S's demands. The next morning, S keeps her word and lends him the boat. When he finally reunites with his fiancée, F, M feels deeply plagued by guilt. After agonizing over it, he ultimately decides to tell her everything about L and S. Tragically, F is completely heartbroken. Furious and feeling betrayed, she breaks up with him, unable to forgive what he did. Shattered by the breakup, M's life takes a turn when a woman named E enters the picture. They start dating, but the past still haunts him. When E notices something is bothering him and asks what it is, M pours his heart out, recounting everything that happened with L, S, and F. After listening to the whole story, E simply says, "I don't mind, that has nothing to do with me." Based on that scenario, how would you rank these characters from most liked to least liked? It's best not to overanalyze, just trust your immediate intuition. This test has been making the rounds for quite a while. Data shows that almost all traditionally minded women tend to put M and S at the very bottom of their list, while men overwhelmingly tend to favor E. The proportions of people choosing L and F are relatively small. However, this exercise isn't actually evaluating your moral stance on infidelity or marriage. Remember, this is a subconscious test, and the subconscious represents the thoughts we aren't even aware we have. Let's look at what each letter actually represents. M stands for money. L stands for love. S stands for sex. F stands for family. E stands for enterprise or career. People who absolutely cannot tolerate betrayal tend to value family above all else. Those who can let go of everything to fully commit to a fresh start place the highest value on their career. Those caught in unresolvable inner conflict value love the most. Anyone who seemingly gains what they want but loses everything in the end puts a heavy premium on sex. And those who look at this entire situation with complete detachment, they are very likely highly practical, goal-oriented individualists. These might be traits you've never noticed in yourself, and you might genuinely believe you aren't that kind of person. But as the old proverb goes, even a caged wolf will howl. Our core, essential self is incredibly difficult to hide. It always finds a way to slip through the cracks when we least expect it. And those unexpected moments are precisely what we call the subconscious. Now, it's worth noting that subconscious is often used interchangeably with unconscious in everyday conversation. In strict psychological terms, the unconscious is a deeply complex concept. It encompasses primal mental activities that remain hidden from our awareness, alongside memories and impulses that have been actively repressed. If these hidden forces were to suddenly burst into our conscious mind, they would contrast sharply with our normal everyday thoughts. But for the sake of familiarity, we usually just refer to this deep inner world as the subconscious. Even though we rarely notice or pay attention to the subconscious, it exerts a massive influence over every single decision we make. Because this influence happens entirely below our radar, its power is immense. It directly serves as the hidden engine behind our irrational choices and compulsive behaviors. The personality test we just went through is just a small, everyday example of how the subconscious operates. Let's look at another, much deeper case from real life. There is a classic case file from Romania that is widely studied in psychology circles. The patient was a 30-year-old woman named Agafia. She was attractive, tall, well-educated, and single. One morning, instead of heading to work, she suddenly began crying and screaming at the top of her lungs, her voice completely hoarse. Her neighbors rushed over to check on her, only to see her bolt out the door wearing nothing but a bathrobe, screaming that there were demons inside her apartment. Since Agafia had no family living nearby and the neighbors couldn't calm her down, they had no choice but to call the police. The officers took her in, assuming she was just experiencing a temporary emotional breakdown, but to everyone's shock, her condition didn't improve over the next month. In fact, it grew steadily worse. Whether she was at the police station, the hospital, or any ordinary room, she constantly claimed she was seeing demons. If the story ended there, it would just be a tragic but standard medical case. Agafia would have been institutionalized, and there wouldn't be much else to study. What stopped the doctors from writing her off, however, was that after exactly 14 days, Agafia suddenly and miraculously snapped out of it on her own. This caught the immediate attention of psychologists and psychiatrists. First of all, her breakdown had absolutely no warning signs. Investigations revealed that the night before her episode, she had gone out on a date with a man and had a wonderful time. Her phone calls with her family right after were completely normal. A deep dive into her background showed she had a stable career, zero major interpersonal conflicts, and no unusual stress at work. Back in college, she was remembered as bright, optimistic, and staunchly atheistic. Her family described a warm, loving, though financially modest childhood. Her parents ran a ranch and a slaughterhouse business, building everything from scratch, and raised her with strict but traditional values. There was absolutely no rational explanation for her sudden psychosis, leading some superstitious onlookers to assume it was paranormal. Second, what truly stunned researchers was her behavior after this unexplainable recovery. Once she snapped out of it, Agafia displayed a completely different personality. She transformed from an outgoing, social professional into someone cold, detached, and deeply isolated. She rejected the suitor she had been dating, quit her job, and locked herself away in her apartment, living entirely off canned food. She turned away her family whenever they tried to visit, and during one visit, she actually failed to recognize her own sister. None of this made sense by conventional standards. Because she refused to cooperate, doctors couldn't perform a proper hypnotherapy evaluation early on. It wasn't until months later, as her behavior became impossible to hide or ignore, that her family finally secured a court order for mandatory treatment. As more experts flocked to study her case, they combed through her past, running comprehensive diagnostic tests and putting her under deep hypnosis. At first, a team of leading authorities from across Europe and America was completely baffled. They couldn't figure out how to classify or treat a condition with no clear cause, so they relied on standard medication, occasionally using heavy sedatives to curb her increasingly bizarre behavior. However, they did agree on one thing: Agafia was suffering from profound paranoia, and her childhood years spent around her family's slaughterhouse was likely a contributing factor. After 3 months of observation, her condition still hadn't improved. That was when a young psychologist from Germany noticed a tiny detail that everyone else had overlooked. Agafia showed an intense, unexplainable aversion to milk. Digging deeper into her medical history, the psychologist recalled a detail mentioned briefly by her family during her intake. As an infant, Agafia hadn't received enough breast milk, so she was raised on cow's milk for a long stretch of time. While cow's milk is nutritious, it is notoriously difficult for infants to digest compared to breast milk. Eventually, a young Agafia developed such severe digestive issues that she nearly died. Because this happened when she was a baby, Agafia had no conscious memory of it, so no one had ever paid attention to the story, but the meticulous German doctor pushed further. He discovered that shortly before her breakdown, local newspapers had heavily covered a tragic story about an infant's death. Crucially, Agafia had happened to be at the scene when it occurred. The doctor actually spotted her in the background of the original police archive photos. The event had deeply shaken her. Using this as his breakthrough point, the German doctor placed Agafia into a state of deep hypnosis once again. During this session, the case finally cracked wide open. A completely separate persona, also calling itself Agafia, surfaced from the dark. A snippet from those long, chaotic hypnosis transcripts reads like this: "Are you saying the original Agafia is dead?" "Yes, she died of indigestion from drinking milk when she was a baby." "Then who are you?" "I am who I am, you don't need to know who I am." Based on this breakthrough, psychologists determined that Agafia didn't actually have split personalities, but rather a severe case of paranoia, rooted in a subconscious terror of death. Her subconscious fear had driven her to abandon her optimistic, outgoing self and adopt a closed-off, hyper-defensive persona just to survive. Her childhood environment was the hidden trigger. Living on a slaughterhouse ranch had forced her to repress her terror regarding the fragility of life. On the surface, she grew up into a perfectly functional adult, but deep down, she was still harboring the shadow of a terrified infant who believed milk was going to kill her. Though they uncovered the root cause, the reality of the situation was far from a perfect Hollywood ending. The German doctor noted that treating Agafia would still take an immense amount of time, patience, and a whole lot of luck. "There's one last question that everyone might be too exhausted to think about, but I'm still incredibly curious," the German doctor said at the end of his notes. How did she know she almost died from drinking milk as a baby? Her parents swore they never told a living soul, and before all of this, she simply thought she just disliked the taste of milk. To this day, even with all our modern knowledge, we can't offer a definitive explanation. The only conclusion we can draw is that Agafia's subconscious somehow remembered an event that her conscious mind should have completely forgotten. This case vividly illustrates a chilling truth. Our subconscious is driving an entirely different persona, or perhaps multiple personas, that we know absolutely nothing about. This is the origin of what we call micro-personalities. So, let's go back to that test from the beginning. What was your ranking? Now that the answers are out in the open, do you agree with them, or does it feel totally off? Honestly, Whether you think it's accurate or not, it highlights a fundamental truth. We like to think of ourselves as entirely rational creatures, but most of the time, the force calling the shots is the part of us we can't even see. Just look at Agafia, an optimistic, successful young woman who had just enjoyed a wonderful date, breaks down overnight, claiming her room is crawling with demons. No warning, no obvious trigger, followed by a sudden, miraculous recovery. But the version of her that woke up was a complete stranger, cold, isolated, shutting out the world, and unable to recognize her own sister. It took doctors months to realize that the root of the nightmare was buried in a memory from her infancy. She had almost died from drinking milk as a baby. She had no idea, but her body remembered. Her brain remembered, her subconscious remembered. Decades later, when she accidentally found herself at the scene of an infant's death, that deeply buried terror and helplessness was triggered. A switch was flipped, and the floodgates burst open. The German doctor left us with that haunting question. How did she know she almost died from drinking milk as a baby? No one can answer that. We can only guess that the subconscious holds on to things it was never meant to keep. This is the power of the micro-personality, the shadow self living beneath our conscious awareness, quietly pulling the strings of our actions, our tastes, our phobias, and ultimately, our destiny. You think you're making choices, but your shadow is choosing for you. You think you avoid certain things just out of simple dislike, but your shadow is doing the rejecting. You think you've forgotten a moment from your childhood, but your shadow remembers it crystal clear. So, let's return to the question we started with. Do you really know who you are? Facing the shadows within us is the only way we can truly step into the light. May we all have the courage to meet the stranger living inside our own minds. Thanks for listening to Mind and Meaning. We'll see you next time.